Running Sentences presents All Hail Zip Zog, Part 7. A Wild Time. Rufus and Finn are unsure of what to do next. Should they go forward with Rufus's idea, or just wait everything out to see where they're dragged off to next? This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences within the story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real incidences, real businesses, real events, and or any fictional stories or real stories for that matter, is purely coincidental. Copyright 2022, Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Once settled into the back seat of this taxi, the two looked up front towards their driver and saw Zip Zog sitting there in the driver's seat. He was sitting there grinning at them. "You two ran away from a very important contract negotiation. I hope you're happy with what's been arranged." He tossed a binder into the back seat. "Look it over, though I have already signed everything, so you should be grand. And where are we headed to today?" Finn picked up the binder and began looking through it as Rufus leaned forward. "Do you know how to drive, Zip Zog?" "I drove up to you, didn't I? Ye of little faith, I shall take you home the fast way." There was a sound of a thump, which Rufus guessed to mean that Zip Zog had thrown his foot at the gas pedal. This was confirmed a second later with a squeal of tires and the car bucking its way forward. The taxi would squeal and protest at every turn as that Zip Zog made it perform, all because he seemingly did not like the idea of taking his foot off of the gas, and as a result, when they left the parking lot onto the highway and then through town, they wound up charging through the evening's traffic, and headed apparently towards home, although they questioned this with the way they were going. Rufus and Finn held on as best they could in the back, being thrown from side to side as they were driven. Things were a blur until they slowed down a bit as Zip Zog threw the car into the parking lot of the apartment building that contained Rufus's place. Even here, it wasn't slow going, for the god who hurtled them through the parking lot into a parking space had managed to come just to a stop at the right moment. The two were thrown forward when he did stop, and he barely seemed to notice that as he bounded out of the vehicle, leaving the two dazed and confused passengers in the back seat, all so that they could sort themselves out. When they emerged from the car, an impatient Zip Zog was wandering around as he took one look at them and then shook his head. "Lightweights! I've gone many times faster than that to get somewhere fast. You two cannot handle one bit of speed." They shook their heads no, and he shrugged his shoulders in return and began walking towards the apartment entrance. "Come on, we gotta go see your neighbor and Bob and see how they are getting along." He hurried ahead of them until they were in front of the door to his neighbor George's place, where, with his usual panache, Zip Zog walked straight up to the door and opened it without bothering to knock. They strolled in with Rufus and Finn sort of staying a bit further back as both had a look of uncertainty about them that was questioning stepping into a place that they hadn't been invited into. This all came to a stop at the hurricane of stuff thrown about the room, with George sitting on one end of the sofa with plenty of religious trinkets arranged around him. Bob, on the other hand, was on the opposite end of the sofa, looking rather displeased, with one of the sofa cushions firmly in his hands. Well, are you two getting along? Bob, you good?" George, He refused to help." You are not the god that I know. I will not take responsibility for what you want." George held up one of the trinkets to try and ward away Bob, and this seemed to have little effect. "All I want for you to say is that you release me from our religious contract to create a new religion. That's all you have to say. You'll be free." "I don't know you." The two seemed to hiss at one another as Zip Zog raised his hand. "Well, unless you two calm down, it will require drastic action." Bob nearly jumped from his seat. "I thought you were on my side, Zip." Bob was off of the couch, in a flash throwing down the cushion to the ground as he got up. There seemed to be almost fire in the man's eyes. Yes, of course I'm on your side, Bob. I can only be on your side because we're both gods. It isn't like I'm suddenly going to be ruling in favor of humans. You did that one time. One time. It was 100 or so years ago, and it only resulted in a minor situation and anger and a typhoon. But yeah, that's it. Well, what is your ruling on this? Everyone looked over at George, holding his trinkets very carefully and hoarding them around himself. Rufus wondered if there was some sort of protection from gods and if they worked. So far, it did not appear to be working, if they were, and he really did doubt that George was in a good situation. You may smite me, but I will never surrender. I will be back. I will be resurrected as something bigger and mightier than you. Well, that's your choice, George, but don't decide on the whole resurrection thing. That's someone else's department, and usually only to teach a person a lesson for being bad. But your other choice is to just say I cancel my contract with Bob the God. So, George, what will it be? Rufus decided that something should be done, and came rushing over between the gods and George. This was, of course, getting out of hand, and well, he didn't know if he could do anything. But dear God, this was madness, wasn't it? Well, no one is going to get sent to heaven or hell or reincarnated because gods are unhappy because somebody won't say something. We aren't doing that here. Yes, you tell them, Rufus. George, why won't you say what these people want? Because they're gods. They always do it when they want anyway. I don't believe for a second that they need me to say some magic words. They don't need anything from me. They're just simply using me to feel good about themselves. I do too need it. We gods uphold our credo to never go back on a contract. Now devils, they'll go back on a contract in a flash. Well, devils... George held up some sort of devilish-looking trinket. Are more trustworthy than you are. At least you know what they're after. I was abandoned for years, for ages, after helping create a religion. And how did you reward me for my work, Bob? Or supposed Bob? You killed an entire group of people, and I had to run away. I had a time limit on my ability to be on Earth. It was the deal I made to help save the world and Earth and create a religion. It's our basic credo as gods. But why wouldn't you then return? I would have, had the other gods given me an allowance of time, but it wasn't given to me because of other things. Did you make a bet, Bob? They all looked over at Finn, who stepped forward with a finger on her hand raised, pointed towards the gods. Then, once everyone was looking at her, she slowly lowered her hand, realizing that everyone was looking at her. It's just that it sounds like you made a bet with other gods, and because you failed to make this new religion, you weren't allowed out of heaven. The god named Bob awkwardly shifted in his spot where he was standing, going from one foot to the other while glancing about the room, trying to find something. It may have been that way, but it is such a time ago, and that I can't recall the exact circumstances of all of this. Bob, didn't Zip Zog here say that he had to break you out of heaven? Why would he do that? Well, we don't like to let many gods out at once. You don't know how much chaos would occur if miracles were happening all over the place. There was lots of head shaking on the parts of the humans. As an excuse, this was a poor one, and none of them seemed to be buying it. Anyway, George, would you like to return to a normal life of not collecting religious artifacts to protect yourself from voodoo and gods and anything else? Well, of course I would. Who wouldn't, Rufus? And are you willing to tell me the words that might free you from, say, a godly contractual obligation? And, just they happen to be in the room at the same time? I guess I could do that. Rufus turned to Bob, who shrugged at him, as he received Rufus's stare. As long as the words are said near me, I guess it will be okay, I guess. Well, George, Rufus turned back towards his neighbor. It's up to you, then. Fine. I renounce the god Bob and am no longer the prophet for whatever his religion was again." A crack of thunder, followed by a flash of light, blinded them momentarily. The power of the apartment flickered, and then it came back. 2 gods were gone, and so was George. Rufus looked about the place, but only Finn was there, and she moved over towards his side, grabbing at his arm. There wasn't even a blackened stain anywhere. What happened? I have no idea, but it cannot have been good, since the gods are now gone, and so is George, and I don't think there's anything here for us, so we should go." She nodded, and they both hurried towards the door. The 2 practically ran from George's place to Rufus's apartment front door. They wanted to get away from what had happened, and before they'd even left, the weird stench had begun to invade George's apartment. It was too much for Rufus, who'd grabbed his keys out of his pocket, only to drop them as he got to his door. His hands fumbled a bit more before he got them off the cement walkway and into the door. "What do you think happened, Rufus?" "The gods made George go poof, I think. They went and did what they said they were going to do. I don't know. Are you still against us trying to make Zip Zog angry at the world, by the way? 'Cause that might be our only way out of this." "I don't know anymore." The door unlocked and he spilled in as Finn followed him in. The shocked and awed couple made their way to the living room and over to the sofa, where they both sat down heavily. They were staring out in front of them, trying to see something, anything, that would help them make sense of what had happened. Rufus was the first to lean back to close his eyes, with sleep coming shortly after, and as he slumped over a bit into Finn, she put her arm around him, and they both got comfortable, sliding down onto the couch so that they could cuddle and go to bed. The next morning was dazed and lost. That feeling had come back to them in full force. Was George gone? Was that going to be Rufus's fate as well? He'd managed to untangle himself from the grasp of Finn and stumbled over to his bedroom. He started to get changed, but still lost in the thought about what to do. The only way out was to get Zip Zog and himself to renounce one another. But would zapping also happen to him? Would he lose everything? The faint sound of a phone ringing snapped him out of it, because it was unfamiliar yet recognizable. "Hello, yes, oh, okay, I'll talk to you later." Finn's voice made his stomach churn. There was a very real need to get her and him, and perhaps Ryan, as far away from all of this as possible. But how? Finn poked her head through the door and raised an eyebrow at the sight of him. "Shower?" He pointed off towards the bathroom, and she turned, stretching and discarding her clothes. "I'll need to borrow some underwear, and also I've always wondered how well 2 people fit in a shower. Please do come join me." Rufus nodded and then kept nodding as she went into the bathroom, and he could digest what had just been said, and then decided that the bathroom was a very nice place to be at this moment, as he put 2 and 2 together. Even though they tried, the 2 people showering together didn't work out all that well. It was, after all, a small shower, and so the 2 settled on getting things done quickly instead of having a bit of fun, although their minds were also a bit distracted by recent events. When they had finished getting showered, they hurriedly got dressed, with Finn borrowing a few clothes, and the 2 found themselves out by the parking lot, with Finn waving goodbye and heading off towards a cab that she'd called for. He paused and wondered when she'd charged her phone and if his charger worked on his phone, and then shrugged. It wasn't important, and he wanted to get over to Ryan's place to talk to him before his friend got stuck deeper into this weird situation. Rufus hurried over to where his vehicle was parked. It would take the last of the morning and some of the afternoon for Rufus to weave his way through traffic and get to Ryan's place. He'd rung the bell to his friend's place a few times before someone else let him into the building. He hurried up to his friend's place as best he could, hoping that the man might just be out for the day and nothing bad had happened. Maybe he was enjoying being a man again, because after all, he had been transformed into a woman for a few days, and had been cooped up in his place, unable to go anywhere comfortably. Rufus steadied himself with this thought as he approached the door to his friend's apartment in the hallway. With a knock on the door, he hoped all was okay, and just to make sure, he checked the door handle, which opened with ease. He wandered in, looking carefully about the place. It seemed normal and all good. There was a scattering of papers which all had things written on it, and he picked up one such item and saw the beginnings of what looked to be a hymn-like thing sketched onto it. Faint words were legible, and he thought about speaking them out loud, but not trusting himself to start singing or chanting the lyrics. He read them silently and then put it to the side so that he could forget the forgettable words. "Ryan, are you home?" "No, go away." Ryan's voice sounded like it had come from a nearby bedroom, and unable to contain his concern that something was wrong, Rufus hurried his way towards there. There was a rather large lump hiding under the cover of Ryan's bed, and it only took one guess for Rufus to figure out that it was Ryan. But why was he hiding? Rufus moved over and grabbed the cover and gave it a good yank. Ryan was sort of lying, sitting, huddled up, looking very much like a man who was trying to hide his chest. "Your gods have made me ugly." "Did they?" Ryan shook his head yes, and uncurled himself a little bit to show that he had quite a set of breasts on him. "Why did they do this to me?" "Well, because they can, and they are gods after all. Are you still eager to be a preacher for a religion that has gods doing this to people?" This earned Rufus a dirty look that said more than any swear in the world possibly could, which was fine by him. He hadn't meant to phrase it as he had, and he felt bad about it. That wasn't... Sorry. That came across as if I'm only interested in keeping things going with Zip Zog. There has been a change, and I think we need to get rid of our god, or gods. There's more than one? Probably. Many of them. I've only seen two. Well, one for sure, and one who was probably a god. Or another one that claims to be a god. I haven't seen them flex their powers, aside from making somebody disappear. This is going to go wrong, isn't it? Well, it might, yes, Ryan. But your choice is to sit here with your chest and be sad, or to help us out. Ryan slowly rolled off his bed, in which caused Rufus to look away, and then head out. His friend was braless, and, well, it was a confusing sight, to say the least, so he wanted to look elsewhere. He had gone to wait by the door to Ryan's place. He wasn't sure, but maybe if he kept moving, Zip Zog wouldn't catch up to him. It seemed a rather unlikely thing, but all he had lately was hope, so he was going with it. And after a few minutes, a buttoned-down Ryan emerged from his bedroom, its new, larger chest mostly hidden away. "What is going on with you that made you decide to go against your god, Zip Zog, Rufus?" Well, he made my neighbor, potentially, vanish into a cloud of smoke. Still not 100% sure on what happened there, but my neighbor is definitely gone. And I don't want the same fate for Finn. And what about yourself? Well, I'd rather it didn't happen to me, but if it takes a sacrifice so that these gods go away, I might be convinced to bite a bullet. Ryan shook his head now and then came over to him. "Not sure that's a good idea. Finn will be very displeased should anything happen to you. So think very carefully about that. And saying anything to her about such matters, because she will probably go off on you and hit you over the head with something to knock sense into you, hopefully. Also, what's the plan?" Well, there isn't really one, but how does finding ways to make a god angry or mad sound to you? Terrible, and like we will wind up in a terrible situation as a result. Are we going somewhere? Yeah, I need to find a really bad megachurch or something similar, I think. Born-again people might work, or if we really... I don't know if we really need people, but maybe just a bad preacher. But my idea is to show Zip Zog the bad side of religion and people and make him want to give up on this whole idea of starting a new one. That doesn't sound like it's going to work one bit. Ryan, however, opened the door and let Rufus step out of the apartment first, as Rufus nodded, and he caught sight of Ryan's eyes, which seemed to have a glint to them. He'd seen the look before on a terribly no-good bar-hopping experiment that wound up with Ryan visiting, to say the least, some places where he shouldn't have, and one stop at a drunk tank in the local police station to top it all off. They'd gotten into Rufus's car and hit the road, finding the highway and heading towards out of town. So, what's the closest heathenish place that you can think of? I have no idea. I don't pay attention to religion. I figured I'd drive until I see a church and then go talk to a preacher about how bad they are. We're gonna get thrown out of a church if you do that. Yeah, probably. Is that going to be a problem for you? For me, no, I don't really care. I'll look up any nearby churches for us to have fun with. Ryan had grabbed his cell phone out of his pocket and began his search, as Rufus continued to cruise down the highway, hitting the city limits shortly thereafter. Minutes passed as he drove and Ryan searched. There is a church about 3 exits up from us. Seems kind of a small one, though. Small churches can get up to some crazy stuff. I say we at least drive by it to see what's going on. Following Ryan's directions, they got off the highway and onto a back road, one that they promptly got off on to get onto an even more back road that was smaller and barely had a lane's worth of a car which could fit down it. Rufus did his best to keep the car on the road and prayed that no one else was coming the other way, which he felt was a bit ironic since he was trying to stay away from Zip Zog for now. The road joined into another much larger one next to a field, where a rather dainty-looking church with a white steeple and all the big parking lot sat for everyone to see. Rufus got the car into the parking lot of this place as the two stared at the church for itself, and then at the small house that was set just behind the completely empty parking lot, minus their car and another one. Well, this doesn't seem like much of a place where bad things might happen. If God can get up to mischief, then people, even in the smallest of nooks, can too. You get up to mischief all of the time, doing weird things, Ryan. Besides, they could all be praising Satan in there for all we know. Wait, do you have their website up or do they have a website? They didn't have one. I found this place by looking through the Maps app. Didn't really say anything about it. Oh, well, this shall be fun then. He turned off the car and with a deep breath got out of it, all while trying to prepare himself for anything and everything. Since there appeared to be no one at this church, Rufus and Ryan had gone up to the house. There was a nice white picket fence that had fallen down in a few places that blocked off the front lawn. They went past this, and then a little ways up a walkway to a front door. This really feels kind of quaint. Yeah, very. At the door to this place, they stopped and then knocked. A few minutes passed, and then, when the door opened, they were greeted by a man in an all-black cloak, looking very somber. "I have 2 lambs that have been led here to be saved. God be praised." With that, he grabbed both of them by the collars of their shirts and pulled them into the house. The priest did not let go once inside. That was until he strong-armed them into his office space within the house. There he directed them into some chairs and then finally did let go of their collars. This man, however, did not move around to sit on the other side of a desk. He stayed there, blocking the doorway out, and held up his hands in a holy manner. "Dear God, I am calling upon you today to help lost souls find their Maker. We must help them find the way to better themselves, and I ask for your help in making them realize that." Ryan looked over at Rufus with a bit of a grimace. Still think that small churches can't hold bad priests, Ryan? The preaching does sound terrible, but he hasn't said anything too terrible yet that you wouldn't expect. Will you two shut up? I'm trying to save your souls. Further interruptions will be met with punishment from God and myself. God moves my hand in mysterious ways. Oh yeah, he sounds pretty bad. By the way, preacher or priest or person, did you know that my friend here, Rufus, is also moved by God in mysterious ways, although maybe not his hand. Not exactly mysterious. He told me what he wants, and a bit of how he wants to get there. But not very well. The priest now began moving around so that he was in front of Rufus. Then, with little grace, grabbed Rufus's face with both hands and stared deeply into his eyes. Have you been touched by God? Have you seen the light and will help God make this world a better place? I only see doubt in your eyes. I see no love. Rufus pried the hands away from his head and tried to push the priest away from him. I have plenty of love to give, maybe not to God, as he's a bit of a mischievous bastard who keeps getting me into bad situations. I don't love him. I do respect his weird powers to make things work and to change things. Namely my friend Ryan here. At one point he was a woman, and now he has breasts. I have no need for someone who talks to God. Anyway, my church and followers are all of the purest of people. We follow the words of the Bible to the T. I have no need for some other prophet. Didn't mention that I was potentially a prophet. It is simple. I am a prophet who talks to God, and this God mentioned a terrible person was coming my way, and that I must save them from falseness. And now that I am sure that it is you, I will hold out my hand in dramatic fashion to cure you of your ills. Do you happen to have any ills, Rufus? No, I don't, Ryan. Well, I do have a god who's very weird, so that might count as an ill. Also, priest person, does your god have a name? Is your god Bob? Rufus, Bob is not a name for a god. It was for my neighbor who was made to disappear by said god, or maybe it was by Zip Zog. Either way, that was the name of the god he was going with. Your gods are not the true gods. I have no need to reveal the name of my god to the likes of scummy people. So you don't have a god then, or you're just saying you have a god to scare us, because, it isn't working, whatever you're trying to do. Why do you care if I have a god or not? It should be of no concern to a mere mortal that a priest can talk to God. Well, sir, I am slightly concerned because of if Zip Zog, my god by the way, knows your god and they too decide that they want to start talking, it's just going to end badly for both of us, probably, Mr. Preacher Man. Gods taking the sides of gods. Rufus nodded to Ryan's comment. Precisely, and gods are not going to help us unless we do something for them first, and even then, that's kind of... Rufus stiffened as he felt a familiar aura suddenly appear over his shoulder. It was only a matter of time before a certain figure caught up with him and decided to start playing. But what did Zip Zog want? Then the god walked past him, looking over at the priest who stood before them. So who's this? It's a priest, one who speaks to God and thinks we are troublemakers. Also, he won't tell us who his god is that he speaks to. Is he now? The priest had cottoned on to the fact that Rufus was now speaking to the thin air beside him, and took to looking at that air, trying to figure out what was there. But since nothing was, he turned and glared solely at Rufus, who offered a grin in return. I will not fall for your tricks. You have no god. Zip Zog then slowly materialized next to the priest. I'm not real? I'm not real? How does a priest get off questioning the existence of a god? Zip Zog's face had gone crimson and maybe looked like it wanted to explode as this priest or preacher turned to see the sudden appearance of Zip Zog. A nudge from Ryan brought Rufus's attention away from the sight, which was difficult since it was a bit spellbinding to see. Should we do something, Rufus? Yeah, good idea. Let's run away. Rufus then jumped out of his chair and was out the door, not waiting around for anything or anyone. He ran all the way to his car in the parking lot, not bothering to take one look around. He didn't care anymore. As he got into the car and tried to start it up, the vehicle was not responding to his key as he turned it over and over again, as if the starter was just dead for some reason. A knock on the window interrupted him, and he looked over at Ryan. You might want to take a look around. I don't think we're going anywhere in that car. Rufus stopped turning the key and staring at that, hoping it would suddenly come to life, and realized that out of the car, all he could see was sky. There should be a forest surrounding them, not the sky. He stepped out onto the parking lot to get a better view of why he was seeing the sky. There should be some woods and grass and road, and yet all that was in front of him was a darkening sky with a few twinkling stars, happily, merrily twinkling away. You know what's going on, Ryan? No idea. The two moved towards the edge of the parking lot where the road should have been. Their steps were careful, as if afraid that the gravel and dirt under their feet was about to suddenly disappear. They made it to the side with slow, careful steps and peered over the edge and then took a step back. There's nothing there, Rufus. I think the ground was there, but it's just really far down. Right, so the floating, flying sensation that I've been feeling makes sense, but still doesn't make any sense. What's going on? Do gods have to make sense with what they decide to do? Ideally, yes, Rufus, if they want us to believe in them. Yeah, I don't think that's really true, Ryan. But Rufus then shrugged. True enough. But there was also nothing he could do about any of this right now, and Zip Zog did what he wanted, and Ryan already knew that. Rufus took another peek over the edge, and found himself looking at a cloud that held the ground that they were on up here. Then he stepped back, his stomach having decided to lurch and feel like it had theoretically fallen the distance back down to earth. He looked over his shoulder to see if Zip Zog was around, and since he wasn't, decided that there should be some exploring to go do and see if anything else was different around here. He circled his way towards the back of the church, staying near the edge of the land, but not too close to where the edge was. He did not want to fall down and off of it after all, and was curious to see if anything would change. The answer to that, as he stopped near the last edge of the dirt at the back of this area, was a resounding no. They were sitting atop of a cloud with lots of air between them and the ground. The only thing he could not tell is if they were moving anywhere, but he guessed that that might not matter as he turned to look at the white wooden building with few stained glass windows dominating some of the walls. He wondered where Zip Zog was, since this was obviously his fault. But as he looked around, he realized that the house the priest and Zip Zog had been in was not with them. Or, well, at least he could not see it from where he was behind this church. Could it be another god? Ryan! There was no response from his friend, so he began the trek back towards the front. He found his friend by the front entrance to the church, trying to get in. Oh, what's up? Why are you trying to get in there? I feel like it would be a bit safer inside. I wouldn't get blown over the side by a sudden gust of wind if, I was inside. I guess that kind of makes sense, unless the gust of wind knocks over the church. And what about you, Rufus? What are you doing? You went wandering off. Oh, I was just exploring, and I started thinking that this might be the work not of Zip Zog, but of a different god. The priest did say he talked to God and all of that. I noticed that the house in Zip Zog was not where I could see it anymore. Ryan stepped back from the door. So in there might be some god that might be angry with us for being non-believers of their preacher. Yeah, potentially, yes. They both looked at the French doors, which then mysteriously opened inward, all on their own. A hymn of choir music floating out to greet them in its melodic intonations. This sent a shudder down Rufus's spine as he stepped up the few stairs to the door and went in. He strolled into this main area of the church, where the pews and pulpit should be. The only thing in front of him, however, was a woman smoking a cigarette and sitting in a chair. She flicked her cigarette as Rufus walked in. "Good evening. Are you the ones who have been bothering my priest?" Yes, though he seems to have gone off the deep end, into the pit of godliness, so not my fault for not believing him. Ryan scurried up behind Rufus and stared at the lady. A god? Is that a god? Yes, I am a god, and my name is Tina. Well, it isn't, as it is something that is completely and utterly unpronounceable for humans, so Tina will do for you too. Nice to meet you, Tina. But if you're going to do something to us, you should know that we have a god on our side. She sat up in her chair, flicking her cigarette once again, as a smile curled around the edges of her mouth. Oh, this is interesting. And who might your devilish god be? Zip Zog. She scowled at the answer from Rufus, and at them, and then dropped the cigarette as she stood up. Rufus noted that not once, when she took a drag of this cigarette, did she exhale any smoke. Was that a power of gods? Or, well, why was a god smoking? That seemed more demon-like than anything else. Well, that makes things both interesting and boring at the same time. I didn't know that they let him loose on this world, but I suppose it should make things interesting in some sense. Okay, but, shall we go greet your god? Does that mean returning to church? Of course, my pet, of course. Tina approached Ryan, who'd said this, and seemed to be staring deeply into his soul through his eyes. There was a loud thump, and the two found themselves jarred a bit, having to reflexively balance themselves. But other than that, nothing happened. Rufus looked over to Ryan, who seemed rather taken with the sight of Tina and staring into her eyes. But this god then strolled past them, waggling a finger at them for them to follow her. Come, come, pets, we do have some talking to do. She led them out onto the grounds of the church, which was once again on the ground. Ryan fell to his knees once he could clearly see that they were back on Earth, as the road and woods were once again visible. There was even a few cop cars and fire trucks with lights flashing across the night sky. Out of the white little house came Zip Zog, dragging the priest, who looked quite frightened about what was going on. Rufus felt like his head was being put on a swivel so that it could keep going round and round and round, trying to keep up with all that was going on. Tina then came to a stop and looked over at the police and firemen who'd gotten off of the road and were now pointing towards them and coming slowly that way. She waved her hand, and they all froze in place. What are you doing to my priest, Zip Zog? Teaching him some manners. I should have known that you managed to escape and infect someone with your silly beliefs, Tina. Hey, they are not silly. They are quite enlightened to the ways of many things, unlike you and your little prophet over here. Fine, whatever, Tina. Are we trading idiotic prophets, then? Should we? I mean, just handing them over seems rather simple, and we, as gods, do not do simple. Well, no, we don't do simple, but you can go back to conquering the world in your way if you trade my people to me, though, and I give you back yours. I know that's all you care about, is getting your people back. She seemed to consider this, then nodded, and so the priest was tossed idly back towards her, and Rufus took a few steps towards Zip Zog when a flash of light overtook him. He glanced backwards to see that the god Tina and the priest were gone. "Rufus, what did you think you were doing?" He turned back to see Zip Zog, who had come up to him and was glaring down at him. The god seemed to have grown at least a foot taller than he'd last seen him. That could only mean anger and that the jig was up. Zip Zog knew he was up to something. "Well, I've been searching for ways to find out how I can make a religion and how priests do it in small locations such as this one." "That is not what I heard." "Well, without a doubt, but are you going to believe the word of your prophet or not?" "No, Rufus, I'm not going to believe the word of my prophet, who's going around doing things his own way." "Well, poop to you. I'm done with this madness. I don't want to end my life like my neighbor did, and I don't want that for my friends either. So take your religion and stuff it with your religious soap operas up your damn ass." Zip Zog's face darkened, and just as dramatically, the sky did as well. In the world-ending sort of vibe to it, but Rufus stood there, hands on his hips, looking up at the god Zip Zog. "Come on, oh God, almighty Zip Zog, or should I hail you? All hail Zip Zog! Is that what you want? Either way, do your worst." The sky continued to darken with large claps of thunder and lightning dancing across it. Rufus, if you get me killed, I'm never forgiving you for it." Rufus glanced back at Ryan, who was still on his hands and knees, and had a rock in his hand which he was kissing repeatedly. "Shut up, Ryan. We'll be dead shortly, and we will deal with it in hell." A flash of light crashed across the sky, and Rufus could no longer see anything. End of part 7. Thank you for listening.